What a great find I found today. You want to see it? It's a special writing code on a cuneiform tablet. I wonder what it says. Oh my goodness, I found another one. Oh, wow. The only thing is like broken in half. I think we could put it together. I wonder what these unique markings are. We know cuneiform. I wonder what they're saying. I wonder if they're talking about something really important. Or maybe it's just their name. Or maybe it's a date. Or maybe it's a story. What do you think? How cool. A whole new language, a whole new alphabet. Well, these writings actually were made by my grandchildren, Ellie, Joy, and Izzy. They decided to use the cuneiform language and write their names. So look at all the symbols are just for Ellie Joy's name. And look at all the symbols just for Izzy's name. Sometimes they have a symbol for each letter or each sound. But how important. We are going to be studying lesson 10, and it's on Sumerian Writing, which is in cuneiform. From Sumer, the city and country of Sumer, the ancient peoples that lived a long time ago, probably over 2,000 years before Jesus. So that would be over 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. That's a long time, isn't it? So they communicated through writing for one of the first times. We know in Egypt, the Egyptians had hieroglyphics, but the Sumerians had these symbols for sounds that we make for their language, so that they could read and know exactly what word it was in their language. One of the first ones. Well, let's talk about ancient Sumer. First of all, we look back as we did with when we were studying Sargon and when we were studying the Hittites, in that area of the, and also all those cities, and Nineveh, all those, and Sumer, all in the same area, which is between the Tigris and the Euphrates River. There were actually 12 city-states that were there, and the Sumerians, when they ruled they ruled over all of those states, and their capital was Ur. Now later on we know the Chaldeans or the Babylonians took over Ur, but at that time Sumer, they had a huge farming industry. They bought and sold all kinds of goods. They wove cloth. They worked in leather. They had metal objects, pottery, bricks and mortar, and they created these beautiful mosaics. So they were pretty advanced way back then. Of course, we know by archaeological evidence, especially because they found thousands and thousands of cuneiform tablets that told about themselves. And most of the tablets, of course, were probably when they were buying and selling to keep track, of that, and to keep track of their merchant dealings or with other countries. But they were also stories. And we know the story, the Epic of Gilgamesh, you'll learn, was found on cuneiform tablets, one of the oldest stories ever. It's kind of a really weird fairy tale with monsters and all kinds of things. Sometimes when you read it like, oh, what is this? But it was one of the first stories that they found on cuneiform tablets. Cuneiform writing. So what is it? What do they use? Well, first of all, we know that they have this special wedge type, they call it a cuneus, and it's a wedge type stick or a stylus that they use to form all of these letters. And they make the characters or the letters in wet clay, and the tablets. And sometimes the clay are flat tablets like Ellie's here, or sometimes they're big round domes and they write all around the circle of the domes. And they found those too. Like I said, the first business records were probably there, and they used certain pictures to represent certain sounds. Well, most people back then, the poor people, could not read and write, but only the wealthy would be able to probably know how to read the cuneiform forms, the upper class. And sometimes they would even write in their journals with them. How cool is that? Also, they had a postal system that went through, and it came from the Akkadians. Remember that with Sargon, he too. But during that time, they had a postal service that they could send their cuneiform tablets in the mail, so to say. Of course, they were carried, there. Maybe by horseback, or we don't know. Maybe by camels. Maybe by, we don't know how they got there for sure. But they did have a postal system, and they would put clay around their writings, and so when they got there, they would break the person would break the clay and be able to read it. So they knew if the clay was broken that somebody else already snuck in and read their letter. So they would have them had clay around them, and also this started the habit of when they would seal it, they put seals on their letters. So if the seal was broken, so they knew that they would already have been read. So, and talking about seals, they developed clay seals for ownership. So they would write on a tablet like this, and they'd write their name. Maybe this would be Ellie Joy, and this would be, they would take this and they'd stamp it for their seal, to seal their name on things. They figured that out, didn't they? Well, how important it is for the written language. Years and years go by without a written language. People pass things down by word of mouth. But in doing that, sometimes there's stories, some of the stories are added to, they're not really 100% reliable and 100% true. Sometimes they have to rely on their memory. Sometimes I'm telling a story and I can't remember just exactly and I get mixed up. They might get mixed up. And sometimes they're just not honest and they brag about certain things that maybe didn't even happen. So how important it is to have a written language, and how important it is for us to have the Bible written down so that we can see, all of these writers, and they're all talking about the same thing. They're all talking about redemption in Jesus Christ. It's such a miracle that we have, and how important it is we have that written Word of God. And also, God says He writes in the tables of our heart. I love that saying, because when we get to heaven, God knows. He doesn't have to write everything down like we do. So anyway, talking about alphabets. So in your book, it also talks about Egypt and hieroglyphics, and how are they different from cuneiform? How are they different? The hieroglyphics use tons of pictures. You'll see pictures of people, you'll see pictures of animals to represent sounds. And they had, their first alphabet was in hieroglyphics, and it was about 31 different figures to represent 31 different symbols. So writing was a great advancement in human culture, to be able to communicate that way. That's why when you write things down, and to save them in your journals, and to always write the best, so that you can tell people the best of what God has done for you in your life. I write those things down. I try to stay away from the negative stuff when I go back and look at it and think, well, I don't really think that way anymore. So I always try to write down the magnificent stuff that's happened to me, and those things that God has intervened in my life. So write those things down in a journal maybe, or maybe on cuneiform tablets. How fun would that be? Huh?